denk dat, yeah, I think they're working. Yours as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this breakout session of the Topsector Logistics. My name is Guido de Wit, and
My name is Niels Veenman.
and the coming 45 minutes will tell you what the Topsector Logistics is already doing to load the future. So go beyond insight in your CO2 and really go for improving. Also, welcome to everybody online. Great to have you here as well today. Maybe a first question: how many of you do already know the Topsector Logistics? Any idea what we're doing? See a couple of hands here. Yeah. Then first a quick introduction about the program. The Topsector Logistics is an innovation program funded by the Dutch government. We have several tracks in which we innovate the logistics sector in the Netherlands on sustainability, on supply chains, on green corridors, on city logistics. And we do all kinds of projects from research to implementation in practice. So really bringing all new knowledge about CO2 measuring, for example, to the companies. Really take away barriers for companies to start measuring CO2, also to create additional value with it. I think we're now at the end of the third Topsector Logistics program, so it's running for more than 10 years already with some great results. Also, Lean and Green as a recognition program is one of the results coming from the Topsector Logistics. And today we'll present some results for companies for the future. Yes, a quick introduction about ourselves. So as I mentioned, my name is Guido. I'm one of the program managers in the Topsector Logistics. So I'm running the carbon footprinting program.
And my name is Niels, as I just already said, and I'm project manager for the project we are presenting over here. And the third guy is Chris, and he was presenting last week, so he's on the same slide deck, of course, but he's not here today.
I think the key thing what we're trying to do is really to give companies perspective to take action themselves. So really go from unconsciousness to create more insight based on data, of course, as mentioned this morning, to really go to a very detailed, actionable level at which companies can improve themselves. Key metric, as we look at sustainability at the moment, is the CO2 per ton kilometers. Everybody knows the CPI, knows which, I see people nodding. So I think for many of you quite familiar, the key KPI also when reporting conform ISO or Count Emissions EU. And by going into this level of detail, and as I'll show you today, not only for CO2, but also for your the capacity of your trucks, the productivity of your drivers, going to this level of detail on shipment level, it really gives you the insight to improve both your operations, your financial performance, and your footprint as a company.
So first about the reporting part. So the CO2 reporting, I think we are all aware of the current CSRD, so the legislation which what is it? Which makes it necessary for all of us to report about our CO2 emissions. This is company-wide, and we have scope 1 and 2, which is what you do with your own company, and scope 3, what is happening outside of your own company. And of course, you also have to report about what you're doing yourself, but also about what your suppliers and are doing on CO2 reporting, on CO2 emissions, but also what happens with the products after they leave your company. And of course, you're aware of what you're doing yourself, but you're not always aware about what your suppliers or the shipments, what happens to the shipments after they leave your company. So currently, it's when talking logistics, when talking transports, we can report on a fine detailed level. So that's when you're aware of your fuel details, when you know how much fuel you spend per trip, per shipment, and then you can calculate per shipment exactly what your CO2 emission was. And there's of course companies that do it themselves. There's companies that make these calculations with the help of the big mile guys, or some of the other companies who do that, like Loginex, or they use their transport management system to make these calculations. But then on a fine granular level, you know per shipment exactly what the CO2 emission was. Second way of calculating is more high level, on a course level, and you use a general number to calculate for your whole company what the CO2 emission is. The downside of this is that it does not comply with the future legislation, and that creates the need for something in between, which is in between these two calculation levels. So, based on the transport performance database that we just launched in the past, weeks, months?
Yeah, September.
September, yeah. There's like a general number which you can use to make a calculation for CO2 emission per shipment, which is much better than the coarse one below, but of course it's not as good as the detailed calculation if you know all the fuel details yourself. But it's a good in-between, and it will be suitable for complying with the future legislation and the CSRD. So how does this work? So when we know the CPI for a cargo segment, so within this database we have currently about 70 different segmentations. So it's not one number for the whole logistics area. So per segmentation, for example, flour transport or concrete transport, there's different segments, and for every segment we have a number. When you multiply that number with the number of shipments and the great circle distance, so that's how these things work, you can calculate the CO2 emission per shipment. The great circle distance is something which is known. You can check it on Google Maps or wherever. The number of shipments is something you know by yourself. And the CPI you can get from the transport performance database. You can get it downloaded by Excel, or you can use the API, which is available to automate the whole process. And if all these parts of the calculation are available, then it's quite easy to make the full calculation. The CPI in the database is calculated by using the numbers that your colleagues or yourself are putting into the database. So we need also your help to get more data in the database, to get more and a better, more precise number for every segment. Currently we have more than 600 data points, I guess, but more is always better in this case. So we ask companies to use the fine data they have for their own transports to put into the database on an aggregated, anonymous level, and we use this to calculate the benchmarks and the accounting numbers and the CPIs. So within this database, there's two numbers. One is a benchmark. You can check for yourself how your company is performing compared to the other companies in your sector, in your segment. So you're not comparing to the whole logistics sector, because that's comparing apples with pears and other stuff. But you're checking, especially for your segment, how you are doing it this year or last year or next year, and how you are improving and how much your sector is improving. So there can be quite a difference between those two, of course. And the second number is what we just talked about, is that you get the number to fill the gap in the data. So for your own company, you probably know, you're aware of all the fuel you're using per trip, and you can calculate the CO2 emission. But if you're using a service provider who is not as data savvy as your own company, and they don't have these exact numbers, you can use the CPI to fill that gap of data and complete your full reporting. Now, currently it's publicly available to everyone, so it's open. You can just browse to the website, create an account, and use it. How this will exactly evolve in the future, we don't know yet. We need to maintain it. We need to do something about it, but we don't know how this will exactly evolve. So one thing we're thinking about is that if you put your data in the database to help it grow and help it get to work, then you also are able to use the data in the database to fill the gaps in your data. That's one thing we're thinking about. We're not sure how it will work in the future. I think that's it for now. Yeah.
Because one of the applications you can use it for example, is of course for CSRD reporting. If you have outsourced transport, you don't get the numbers from them. But also, if you want to go for a fourth or a fifth lean green star, then also your scope is increasing. And you need numbers of your charters as well. So for those cases, this is what we really envisioned this application for, because it will have better data than the defaults. But indeed, you can start if there's no primary data available from your charters.
Yeah. If there's any questions in between, then please just ask.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll come to you with the microphone. Yeah.
How does this compare to CO2 emissions or GLEC, for example? And isn't there a risk that people will just find the best CPI, the lowest, to reduce their CO2 without doing anything?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Maybe to answer the second one, the last one first. What we're at the moment doing is we have these segments, which are a minimum of 5 companies that have the same trade. We look at the CPIs of those individual companies for this segment. And to avoid indeed called free riding or picking the lowest number is what we say, okay, if this is the maximum of the segment, we give it a surplus, and that's something, and that's the number you can use if you don't have primary data. So it has the CPI of the segment plus a surplus. And indeed, you need to make sure that you pick the right segment and not one that's very favorable. So what we see there is a role for the accountants, because in the CSRD checks and to check if everything is calculated according to ISO, the accountant plays a role there. And we set up the definition of the segment as such that it can be checked by the accountant. So that's where the
in slightly different words is also that we try to make sure that the CPI number is always a better number than the general number when from the course calculations, but the number is worse than when you have the detailed brandstoff data, fuel data.
The first question was about GLEC, I think, about CO2 emissions. Yeah. If you look at ISO, the new ISO standard, the KPI you need to report in is the CPI, which is the ton kilometers per ton kilometers in great circle distance. And if you look at, for example, GLEC, which goes about the driven kilometers and other emission factors as well. And if you then need to go from a KPI or a default value that says the CO2 per driven kilometer, you need all kinds of adjustment factors about your load factor and about your routing to come to this ISO KPI, which is in great circle distance. So therefore, by setting it up like this, calculating all information, converting it for a CPI per segment in ton kilometers great circle distance, it can be directly used if you know the type of cargo, the origin, destination. So it's very easy for companies that don't have primary data to use this calculation for their reporting purposes. So that's where the difference comes in. We'll give a demo at the end of the presentation. So then I'll move on to the second part, which is more about the optimal use of scarce resources. Any of you are involved in city logistics? No? Or do some shopping once in a while in the city center? Yeah, I guess everybody. This is a picture in the Netherlands. I think it's Arnhem, but we see the same case in all kinds of cities where there are lots of trucks every morning queuing up to make sure all goods come into the stores. A lot of people complaining about what are all these trucks doing here. A lot of annoyance. This is another case. On the left, you see a route that's been driven by a truck, an actual route. And yeah, it doesn't really make sense. It's a kind of circles throughout the city all day, causing a lot of additional driven kilometers, traffic jams. And it's because all those distribution centers have time slots, and which logistic service providers have to meet. So they're given a lot of constraints they have to fix within their operation. So you see how efficiently is our transport actually organized. A lot of times we look at logistic service providers and their trucks and their planning, and we see, can't they fix it? But the actual problem often is somewhere else in the supply chain, whether that being your customer with slots at the distribution center, the amount of delivering frequencies during a week that's requested, time slots by the municipality, opening hours of stores. So although we see the trucks as the issue, but it's more the symptom, and the underlying root cause is somewhere else in the supply chain. So we started diving into this because we really wanted to solve the root causes, and then of course the symptoms will follow. Because we believe if we can increase the load capacity of trucks, it's good for cities, it's good for the load on the road network, it's good for your operational margin because you can ship more in the same truck. So there are a lot of benefits in getting this right over the supply chain. But when we dove into it, and we tried to answer the question, how efficiently is transport organized in the Netherlands, we couldn't actually find a detailed answer. We know that's what's measured. That's 31% of the trucks in the Netherlands drives empty. That's measured by the CBS, and that's kind of agreed within the sector that this number is correct. But there's a lot of discussion about it. We don't really know. And we don't know either how full the other 69% of the trucks is. If that's one pallet, if that's a full truckload. So there are no clear metrics on how you should measure the logistical efficiency on a company level, on a sector level, on a country level. It's not measured. There's no uniform way to reporting it, also to customers. So when we run into this issue, we thought, okay, but if we can create insights based on the information on where the spillage of capacity is, who is causing it with which restriction in the supply chain, and what kind of ways to cooperate together are successful in making better use of that capacity, we can do a lot of good for companies throughout the sector. So this is the mission we set out to do, finding out in detail where the problem is, who can solve it, and how we can solve it together. We started off by first looking at the CPI. So in detail, if you have Big Mile doing the analysis, you see already which routes are energy inefficient and which not. But there are underlying drivers that determine the CPI. Of course, fuel type, driver performance, also mentioned this morning, and indeed the load capacity, the loading of the truck, the load factor, and the productivity, because those two are interconnected. If you have a lot of waiting times, then your truck can't be full. So there's often an interconnection between your routing, your productivity of your drivers, and how full your truck can be. So by adding a little bit of information about the truck capacity to the information that is already in Big Mile, and this information you probably already have in your company, we can look at the LPI, which we call the load performance indicator. And it has the same level of detail, so it also works based on the co-thread methodology with the hand. So the routing, you can per shipment identify, was this an efficiently transported shipment or not? And what we do within the Topsector, we partly develop new methods, but also test it thoroughly in practice. So we did with transportation companies, collaboration with municipalities and shippers. We were supported by 2 consultancy companies, Buck Consultants International and Districon, part of Royal Haskoning. And all the logos on the slide you see were companies that participated in various kinds of projects. It can either be identifying where the issue is, who can solve it, or how we can solve it together. And these dashboards were created together with Big Mal, I think, in this case. So adding a little bit of information, giving you more detail about your shipment. In this case, is about the truck capacity. Where is the truck capacity high? Where is it low? On what routes? What customers? And to give you some anecdotes about the results we found. For example, we saw a drop, certainly, from a company that supplied dairy products to a supermarket. And we confronted them with the numbers and said, it's the case because we lost the tender, so our volume dropped with 50%. But they want the same amount of weekly frequencies. They want to sell a shipment 5 times a week. And then we called the supermarket, and they said, that company that always coming with half-full trucks, can't they reduce the number of delivering frequencies? So we saw that people were doing things the same way as they always did, but because the volume changed, for both parties it was inefficient. And by looking at that level of detail in your operation, we saw where is the issue and who needs to solve it, so changing delivering frequencies. And in this case, it was an easy way to fix it. But we see this as a very promising way forward to add to the software programs that are already there, this additional level of information. And the same holds for time, for the productivity of drivers. It's the same kind of dashboard. You need more information. You need more information. All the time stems from the board computer, because then you can track which activities are done when. And in this case as well, we saw some customers that popped out as red dots on the map. And that was because those customers had very high penalties for being late, and there was always traffic jams. So what was the company doing? Make sure you arrive early before the traffic jams to avoid those penalties. But then you had, on average, 2 hours of waiting time per delivery for this customer. And in this case as well, by confronting the other party with the situation, I said, okay, now then maybe we can discuss the penalties or make them a little bit more flexible, because that's the conversation that you need within your supply chain to optimize the system and make sure that your trucks are fuller and the productivity of your drivers is higher. So it all starts first with very detailed insight on shipment level. And this is kind of a summary of what we found there. So we did this with 10 cases, 10 companies, and every time you see it's the logistics service provider that has the data to find out where the problem is, where capacity is spilled, but it is the other parties in the supply chain that often have the power to be more flexible or to remove restrictions. And that leads to further optimization possibilities for that logistics service provider. So you do need that collaboration always, because one can identify the spillage and the other one has the option to improve it. And it's always delivering frequencies, time windows, the 4 mentioned. One of the pilots I would like to highlight is one of the municipality of Rotterdam. At first we identified here the LPI, so the load capacity of the trucks. So we could see how full the trucks are, where the capacity was built. And they're actually going into a pilot phase now because the municipality was surprised by how much capacity loss they introduced, because they thought, oh, we create a very livable city, trucks can't enter after 11 o'clock in the morning. But due to that, sometimes 2 or 3 trucks had to be moved into the city from the same company. So there were actually more trucks in the city than less. So they realized, okay, we're creating our own problem here. So they're willing to do a pilot with a few logistics service providers, a few selected logistics service providers, so they can enter the city until a later time in the morning. But then we now see that the other party in the supply chain has to move, because we can increase even further if shops allow earlier deliveries, sometimes even 30 minutes, but they can create fuller trucks, so less trucks in the city center. So what we see here is that it really helps the discussion if you can pinpoint where the spillage is occurring and why is it occurring. But getting this collaboration right, that another party has to move to solve the problem, that's difficult. It's always been difficult, but what you typically saw in the past, that this is discussion about cost. And if you add CO2 to the discussion, then you get a common thing to fight for, because everybody wants to reduce their CO2 emissions. Also for this store, the logistics is a scope 3 emissions, which they have to report. So what we found during the project is that adding CO2 to the discussion creates a new conversation, creates a new way to get together on the table. So what we're doing the coming years is further standardizing this way of calculating, this LPI, and we're also introducing the TPI, the time performance indicator. Putting this further to test with companies, scaling it up, adding it to software companies. So we are discussing with Big Mile and Loginex on how to make this way of calculating the standard, with TMS systems. So really make sure that this is a thing that can be done by market parties individually. And what does need work is this way of collaborating together, finding new ways of splitting the benefits in a fair way to make, to realize those capacity benefits. We identify.
Yeah, so I think we're always open to share the knowledge that we do, that we make, that we create, and work together with other parties from the Netherlands, but also outside, to gain even more knowledge and put it into practice.
And maybe before we go to the demo of the transport performance database, any further questions on the, we call it time and capacity pilot studies? No, if they come later, that's fine as well.
Yeah, your story was very clear.
I think so.
So it's quite a simple online tool. I already logged in. We see at the first page we see a dashboard. It's the CPI overview. We see for all segments, and we can make a selection, and then we see only 1 or 2. But we see we have quite a lot of segments which show us the numbers, and the benchmark CPI on the most right field. So for it's the segments are in Dutch, but we see bloemen and planten, which is flowers, and they have a CPI of 0.13 on a benchmark. And in the benchmark are all the numbers we can gather for that specific segment. So you can compare yourself with the segment that you're operating in, and if you're operating in multiple, you can compare a part of your company, of course, with others. I can show you the no registrations, because they're always connected to your own company. So when you're uploading data, no one else can see that data points. We use them in the background to make the calculations and to show you these numbers, but there's no other people that can see your data, what you're uploading, and it's aggregated data. So it's not on a shipment level; it's a much higher level which we're using. But you see, we have an import. You can always make an export of all the data you put into it. So if you want to do a later check on it, and there's also an API available to load the data from your own systems into the database in an automated way if you want to contribute more often. Then we have the accounting page. So this is where you select for a certain year or years, and you select a segment and a subsegment because there's 2 levels of segmentation in the system. Of course, a modality and a fuel type because you don't want to compare like a diesel truck with an electric truck. Electric truck will have no carbon emissions, of course. And the vehicle type, because a bigger truck or a smaller truck makes a difference. And based on the selections you make, you get the number you can use to fill the gaps in your data. So if one of your service providers is not able to get you the CO2 emissions on a very detailed level, but you know what shipments he's making for you, you can get based on this a number where you can calculate, which you can use to calculate the CO2 emissions in a correct way.
Yeah, I see a question over there.
Thanks. Is this also usable for international road transport, or is it just for Dutch companies?
Yeah, thanks for the question. At the moment, the main scope is the Netherlands, but there's international road transport in it. It can easily be added. Also looking at international developments of the counter emissions EU legislation, we see that there one of the elements is that the European Commission wants to have a good database or set of databases for your CO2 emission reporting. So also in that light, we set it up as such that it can be expanded internationally. And so it's definitely developed as such. And will be added in the coming years. Yeah.
So currently most data points are from the Netherlands, but might be usable in surrounding countries, of course, because road transport is road transport in some ways. There are some international data points, but as we just launched, we hope to put more into it. Also good to know is that currently it is built, and we've all shown numbers for CO2, but it's designed in such a way that in a later stage we can easily add, for example, nitrogen, if that makes sense at that point in time.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, here in the front row.
Thank you. So what modes of transport are available to look at? Is it only trucking, or are you also looking at other stuff as well?
At the moment, the majority is trucking. We do have inland shipping and some parts of rail as well. So also here, because we collected most of the data from trucking companies, but there are also intermodal shippers. So there's also intermodal data in it, but that's a small part yet. We did in the Topsector a similar project on inland shipping vessels, where we measured 19 vessels for more than a year, real time with every 2 seconds data. So based from those kinds of projects, we can add information to the system in the coming years. So it's easily expandable as well. Yeah.
I think so. A question. So what about if I would want to add data to this database, what quality does that data need to have? Like, I'm guessing it should be based on fuel consumption, etc. Then again, I see some modalities here where that's going to be very tricky. So what kind of quality do you demand from the data that is uploaded? And does your audience have the ability to do that?
Yeah, thanks. Data quality is a key aspect indeed. So only primary data can be entered. So that means real fuel consumption data. And therefore, I'm not sure which modality you saw, but pipelines, yeah, or deep sea shipping or air freight. That's at the moment difficult. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's tricky, and if if you're looking for an accounting number, if you want to fill a gap in your data, and you're looking for pipelines, then you don't have fuel information available. You can put the data in the database, but the data quality is one of the fields we ask you to fill, and based on the data quality, we know and we check whether we can use it to calculate an accounting number. And so the primary data, fuel based, is the best data we can use to calculate accounting numbers, but the full data set, including the not so good data, we can still use to calculate the benchmark for the segment. There's of course a small difference between those two.
Yeah.
And also on data quality, when you just upload data, you can upload whatever you want, but on the background there's, currently, because we just started, a manual check, and we're in the process of automating that to do all kind of statistics to check whether does this number make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, we can, of course, give you a call. Well, you uploaded this and this number. Does it make sense? Is it correct? And then, so we check the data on the background to make sure that we keep the quality of the data high.
And the roadmap, in addition to that, the roadmap for the future is that most of the data will be entering the system via a Big Mile, Loginex, or other CO2 accounting systems. They have, of course, all the quality checks. They have a lot of, they know what data quality is. So partly the data quality checks done there. And of course, indeed, we need to check if it's the right segment. And yeah. Therefore, the data quality assurance will be easier in the future. Yeah. Any final question before we head for lunch? Then I'll thank you for your attention. Yeah, we'll be here after the presentation for any questions. So feel free to approach us. Thank you. Have enjoyed the rest of your day.
Thank you.